So Anthony, thanks a million for joining me this evening. Really excited. After I read Red River 7, I was like, oh God, I really need to reach out to this author. I absolutely love that book. And I suppose a quick question on it first, because I think it was wrote in 2023. Like, did the pandemic then have a big influence on like this massive kind of contagion taking over? Where did the genesis of this idea come from?
Yeah, basic idea predates the pandemic, but obviously everything influences you. You know, everything's an
Yeah.
influence, really. So it certainly threw it all into stark relief. And I wrote it, I think, in the second year of the pandemic. Uh, so yeah, the thoughts about around all of that were certainly at the forefront of my mind. But it wasn't like, oh, there's a pandemic, I must write a pandemic book.
Yeah.
I was always going to write it. It probably would have been a slightly different book if COVID hadn't come along. Uh, but yeah, it certainly it did have an influence. I think the sort of there's certain allusions to conspiracy theories in the text, which might not have been there, but for how all the nonsense that people were talking about COVID when it was all going on.
Yeah.
Still are in some certain respects. Yeah, so that's reflected in it. But that's probably the most obvious influence.
Yeah, and I think it's because in the first chapter you just get this kind of deep mystery. It just draws you in. Like I think it's such a great way to like structure a novel is to like,
Yeah.
from the very first step or the very first chapter, the reader is sucked into this mystery that you kind of need to keep turning the page to find out. And I think it was just the pacing to get like kind of to the end where it all kind of falls together. Was just incredible. I have to say, my favorite character in the novel was Platt, which is probably strange, but I tend to really veer towards the villains in novels. I think they have such an interesting backstory. Like if you go, I'm sure you've probably maybe watched the Walking Dead. Like I think,
Yeah.
yeah, if you have, like Negan, I think was one of the, a really complex character, but a really interesting character as well for all his flaws. But again, it was driven like a lot of his that sadness and that kind of went into his psychopathy was driven by that loss of his wife and child. But when you're writing villains, how are you conceptualizing the villain? Like, are you coming from a psychological lens? Is it from, or is it just complete exploratory? It kind of flows as it goes.
Um, I think you have to look at why real people in the real world do bad things. Sometimes, like Plath, for example, is a sociopath.
Yeah,
She was always going to do bad things because probably born that way. I think with a character like Negan in The Walking Dead, he's been made that way. The world has changed him, and so there are different. There's many different types of villain as there are different types of hero, and I think you have to reflect that because if they're all the same, it's really boring. And the more complicated your villain is, the better it is for the reader.
yeah,
Darth Vader, quintessential movie villain. What is Star Wars without Darth Vader?
yeah,
Nothing much, let's face it. But he isn't a one-dimensional pantomime villain stomping around. He does do some stomping around, obviously, but it becomes apparent, probably, from The Empire Strikes Back onwards, that there's a lot more going on with this character than you originally thought. So you have to give them more than just, I want to destroy the world, or I want to do bad things because I'm bad. And in Plath's case, I think it was, a basic malicious nature coupled with a desperate desire to stay alive in a world where she knows most people probably aren't going to be staying alive.
yeah.
But she is, because that's who she is.
That's it. And I think the thing about villains, for me anyway, is it kind of goes back to the Hungarian concept of the archetype, and especially around the shadow. And I think why villains make people uncomfortable or why people gravitate towards them is because they either get because the villain is a mirror in my eyes, and it holds up a mirror to someone and it shows them the shadow inside. What's the potentiality for badness and goodness, and for virtue and kind of violence and stuff like that. But in your estimation, like, what is the, like, from someone that has wrote so many stories with heroes and villains in it, what is the line that separates the hero and villain? Because, like, you could expose maybe two characters to fairly, like, similar life events and get a hero and a villain. So what is that line?
I think it's hard to define. I think that ultimately every character is defined by action rather than words. And I think what makes a villain is a basic. It might not, calling it self-interest is probably too mild, but villain ultimately puts their own, not necessarily themselves first all the time, but their objective first. There's the whole concept of the villain being the hero of his own story. In their mind, they're the hero. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ming the Merciless, as far as he's concerned, he's a benevolent leader. And there's this, terrorist called Flash Gordon going around screwing everything up. That's his perspective. So I think perspective is part of it. It's how does the villain view the world as opposed to how everyone else views them. And in the real world, Vladimir Putin thinks he's a hero.
Yeah.
I'm sure he sits in his bunker, convinced he's, modern day Peter the Great. Where much of the rest of the world sees him as a delusional dictator.
Yeah.
So, it is all about perception at the end of the day.
And you've seen that in, the Marvel series with Thanos. The thing is, there's a slight, it's kind of hard to empathize because it is wiping out half the planet. But you can empathize with almost the idea of that he's doing good. But again, it doesn't play out like that. But it's like what you were saying. It's, with Putin, or if it's, Kim Jong-un in North Korea, and these sort of, people have viewed themselves as like demigods almost, but, do a serious amount of harm. But you kind of get like that with fictional characters. And the scary thing is nearly, I think because there's so much unrest now, you're starting to see like these villain archetypes like just pop up everywhere. Like it's I think in 2019 it was harder for me to imagine a villain because there was less almost source material out there. But now it just seems like they're popping up everywhere.
Yeah. We were supposed to have seen the end of history. If only. No, yes, it's weird now that everything's changed in a relatively short amount of time, and we're awash with villains now.
Yeah.
I don't know, my own point of view. Maybe not so many heroes. Maybe they'll emerge. Who knows? But plenty of villains and not so many heroes.
I know, and as well, like the thing is, what I always kind of track back to as well is like, when ancient Rome would have been at its heights, when ancient Greece would have been at its heights, when the pharaohs were at their greatest power. Like none of them civilizations could have foreseen collapse, and they all did. And it just like I get worried now because the unrest is ramping up at a rate that I didn't see, and it's like I hope I'm not going to be like a future historian is going to be looking back at our era and just being like, no one kind of seen it coming. No one would have had any idea. Like, do you get much inspiration then around like what's culturally going on, like what's in the zeitgeist, the social mores, so to speak? Like, does that influence a lot of your writing when you're going into these world buildings or even into your horror novels?
Yeah. To be honest, I try and resist being too, especially with fantasy, I try and resist being too allegorical or too obviously allegorical because I always think it's a bit clunky, to be honest.
Yeah.
But, there are historical parallels to what's happening now, and it might sound insane, but statistically at least, this is the best time to be alive that it's ever been, to be a human at this point in history. this is the best time ever in history in terms of life expectancy and lack of poverty and availability of medicine and all the rest of it. But it really doesn't seem that way if you watch the news. And I think when you take a look at periods in history where it was really not a good time to be alive, like in the middle of the Black Death or something like that, then it kind of throws the modern age into a bit of stark relief. So sometimes I'll, be consciously reflecting the modern age, but a lot of the time my influences tend to be more historical.
Yeah.
But historical, eras always echo. There's always a parallel in the modern age if you look for it hard enough.
Yeah, like the fascinating thing is I've seen so much of that research as well, where it's like pretty much murder has come down. People live longer, access to medication, less poverty. But I think like these are like so much of that is there's we're living in abundance. I think that's what the biggest distinction probably is. But I don't know like what the correlate there is with. Are people happier? Like it seems like yes, there's less poverty, but it seems like there's more anxiety, there's more depression. People, I don't think, feel any better with with the abundance. Like, and you see this like sometimes when maybe they go out to like tribes in the Amazon, and these people have like a really high life satisfaction score compared to someone like that lives typically in the West, works in a cubicle office, makes ends meet, gets on a holiday a year. Like it's existence, but I don't know if it's it's like existence connected to the center of nothing. And I think there's a spiritual probably carpet being ripped out of the world. And whatever that means and whatever way it manifests. But I always find it so interesting, like when I hear that research that yes, things have been as good as ever, but I don't know if people are happier. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Happiness is relative.
Yeah.
If you've been brought up, I'm glad I wasn't born rich, put it that way. Having met some people who were born rich, no harm to them, but put them in any kind of difficulty, they're not going to do well. Because they don't know any better. To a certain extent, it's not their fault, And I think that we always relate our current circumstance to other people's. Someone's always got it better. I could be, a multi-millionaire and, pointing at Elon Musk, saying, well, look at that bastard, he's got all the money in the world. But is he happy though? I suspect Elon Musk isn't.
I think he's drugged out a lot.
He knows what day it is. But probably best if we don't start down that road, because I will start ranting. But yeah, happiness is relative. But yeah, I'd still come back to us living in an age where most of us don't really have an excuse to be miserable, but that doesn't stop us being miserable.
Yeah.
And something that struck me about The Walking Dead, if we were talking about that earlier, was when I read the introduction to one of the collected editions for the Walking Dead comic book. It was about the author, Robert Kirkman, was talking about how, we don't actually live in the modern world. We don't fully live. We don't fully experience all the range of emotions because in our day-to-day lives, we're not tested. We don't have to fight for survival every day. Like, as go back 10,000 years, we did have to fight for survival every day. It's a fundamental idea behind The Walking Dead was at the end of the world, we're finally forced to start living, even if we're living in a nightmare. At least you're fully alive. Yeah, you might not be for very long, but at least you're fully alive. And I think that maybe we, in the modern age, we numb ourselves. We've got so many distractions. We've got video games, TV, streaming television. We've got drugs if you want them, alcohol if you want them. We don't even have to make them ourselves. You just go down the shops and buy them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think the plethora of distractions is maybe one of the reasons why people aren't as happy as perhaps they could be. But,
Yeah, and I think like that's probably why post-apocalyptic, that genre of whatever form it manifests in, if it's TV, writing, novels, movies, it's a popular genre because I think probably even what we're circling around there is almost life is predicated on survival, and if you strip the survival element out, you're almost stripping the meaning out of life to an extent. And then yes, what like floods in afterwards to replace that survival, almost drive. Like I think Freud had, he had Destrudo was the death drive in people, but libido then was the life drive, and you strip that out of people, and it's, I think there's a loss of meaning then, which is again, like it's weird because it's kind of almost a paradox here because you don't want to have to be fighting for survival because that's going to suck. You don't want to be starving, trying to hunt down a kill, running from marauders, like which is a kind of archetypical post-apocalyptic scenario. But you almost don't want to get to the stage where you're so pacified. Like, have you ever seen that movie Wall-E, where all the characters are up in space, like just like in the utopian of comfort, like, and just satiation. And it's like, it seems horrible. And you hear these stories of soldiers who come back from war and have this like almost longing pang, and almost depression of not being out in the kind of war zone, because obviously whatever that like facilitates in the human psyche is this, like, I can imagine, extraordinary feeling of being alive. And it's like what you alluded to there a minute ago as well. It's that feeling of being alive, even though that comes with so much negatives as well. So it's kind of this weird scenario. Maybe a big hike. Maybe I'll do that at the weekend and see, can I rustle up some of this kind of survival meaning that we're
yeah,
probably missing?
do some base jumping or something like that.
Definitely. Well, look, Anthony, one of my favorite lines in any book was in Gatsby. And it's like where he repeats, he goes, if I could just get back to the start. And there's like a pause. If I could just get back to the start. So let's go back to the start with you. Where, like, what's chapter one in Anthony Ryan's story? Where does it begin? And this can be you as a writer. It can be you as, as the man you are now. It can be, for an early memory. What would chapter one, like, if you have to think?
Me and Anthony Ryan as a writer begins when I completed my first, it wasn't the first novel I completed, but I like to think of it as the first real novel I completed, because I'd written things before which, frankly, weren't very good. But Blood Song was my first, novel where I felt I had actually written something worthwhile, put it that way. Well, a novel that was worthwhile, because I'd written
Yeah.
short stories and stuff, which weren't too bad, my humble opinion. But with Blood Song, I felt I had something, and I did the usual, sending it out to agents, and the usual, but getting it back from agents with a form, rejection letter. This is going back to 2010, so you still had to send them a physical manuscript in those days.
Oh, wow.
There's this stuff called paper.
What's that?
Print words on in ink. I did have a collection of rejection letters, but I don't think I've still got them anymore. It was rejected by every agent I sent it to. So this was at the time when self-publishing was just kind of taking off as a viable thing. So I self-published Blood Song on Smashwords. I don't know if you know Smashwords.
No.
Yeah, it's a self-publishing ebook site. For about 6 months, it was only on Smashwords, and in that time it sold a massive 5 copies. I did get some nice feedback. And this was about the time that Amazon opened up the Kindle store to self-publishers. And it was only when they put it on the Kindle store that suddenly it started to take off. It sold 20 copies in its first month, which I remember at the time being delighted because of that. having sold 5 copies in 6 months,
Yeah,
sold
big
20.
step up.
Wow, this is great. Uh, so my ambition was, I thought maybe if I could sell 1,000 copies, maybe I could interest traditional publishing in it again. But in the end, by May of 2011, which is when I published it on Amazon, it sold 40,000 copies.
40,000.
Yeah.
Whoa, how did it gain that traction? Like, I read one of the comments under Amazon. It was like someone that read 25 books a year consistently for the last 20 years, and they said it was the best book they've ever read. Like, did you run advertising? Like, how was it just organic that people
In
found
those
this book
days,
and ran with it?
in those days, you could still do it. You could still get some amount of success purely through organic sales.
Wow.
I don't think you could do it. If I tried it today, I don't think it'd work. It's, there's still tens, if not hundreds of thousands of books on, Amazon KDP at the time.
Yeah.
But today it's millions, and a lot of them are, AI generated crap.
Yeah.
But in those days, if it was good, somebody somewhere would read it, and if they liked it, they'd review it positively. And that was enough in those days, with the algorithm as it was, to, get it going. So to the extent that I'd sold 40,000 copies. And it was in May of 2011 that I got an email from an editor at Penguin asking if I was interested in having a conversation.
That's a nice email to get, I'd say, or mail after rejections, because they're brutal, and you're kind of gaslighting yourself, you're second guessing yourself, so yeah, how good did that feel? Like, was that like, whoa?
It was more sort of feeling of shock, I dropped my phone. I was at work at the time, and my phone. So I had to go and find a quiet place to email them back because I didn't want to do it at my desk. So yeah, it was a surprise more than anything, because I really wasn't expecting it. And so yeah, just after that, I tried to treat it as a sober sort of, I have to approach this professionally, but really, I wasn't going to turn it down.
Yeah.
When they made me an offer, it was a 3-book contract, is what they offered me for, which was Blood Song plus the sequel and the third one in the trilogy. Yeah, and the money, there'd been other people who'd been sort of lured out of self-publishing at the time for 6-figure sums. I didn't get 6-figure sums. It was respectable money.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, up there with the huge deals that some people were getting. But the nice thing was, I earned it back as soon as Blood Song, the traditional published version of Blood Song, as soon as that came out, I pretty much earned out the entire contract.
Whoa.
So yeah, it was kind of went from there really, and I still have forays into self-publishing with novellas and short stories and stuff, but I've been primarily traditionally published ever since.
Yeah.
Over
And so
10
after
years.
the 3-book deal, Anthony, then, did you renegotiate them for another contract? Because obviously, you've been very prolific. There's been, like a few different series, trilogies, and then you've segued into horror, kind of post-apocalyptic. Like, so what way did that manifest?
Well, I did this, one of the smartest things I've ever done. I got an agent.
Ah, yes.
They take care of all of that.
Yeah.
So basically how it works is I write them, my agent sells them. It's not like I write them, send them to him, and he sends it back with a load of suggestions. It doesn't work that way with us. I know it does with other writers and agents, but my agent is Paul Lucas at Janko and Nesbitt in New York. I guess I'm fortunate he really likes my work.
Yeah.
So I haven't yet sent him anything he hasn't been able to sell. And then with Red River 7, which is a departure for me, it's my first sort of non-fantasy, traditionally published book. Yeah, he was very enthusiastic from the get-go, and certainly it's been sold in, I think, more countries than Bloodsong has, which I think 17 countries or something. Red River 7 got sold in, and in translation, you know.
It's a cracking book. Like, and the thing is, when you're reading it, like, I'd love to see it in a movie. Like, it's hard to maybe condense in a movie, but even in like you just, it's so made for the big screen. Obviously, it'd probably take a lot of budget because
Yeah.
there's so much kind of going on, and it's like this post-apocalyptic London. Like I can just imagine. I was in London like at the weekend, and I kind of looking around the place, almost thinking of parts of the book. But I love a book that kind of has that lasting effect.
Yeah.
But like, what made you kind of transition then? Like, had you always a kind of maybe a bit of a burning hunger to go try the horror angle, horror kind of post-apocalyptic angle as well as the sci-fi, or?
Well, I've got this, what I call the endless idea factory in my head. People are always asking, where do your ideas come from? I don't know exactly, but I do know that they never end. I will depart this world with books unwritten, put it that way.
Yeah,
I am never short of idea. And my ideas don't all relate to fantasy. A lot of them do, obviously, but
yeah,
an awful lot of them don't. And post-apocalyptic is one of the things that the idea factory in my head seems most interested in. But yeah, there are other things. I'd like to write a historical detective novel one day, if I could ever find the time. So, yeah, and various other things. I may even write a Western one day. It's just dependent on time, really, because
yeah.
writing epic fantasy takes up a lot of space. Uh, so, Red River 7, you may have noticed, was not a long book. It's about 63,000 words, which for me is pretty short.
To be honest, I gravitate more towards the shorter books. Like my favorite book of all time is Gatsby, and it was 45,000 words. Uh, Same with Lawrence Durrell, the Black Book. I think it's probably coming in at around 45,000 words. Yeah, or it's around 230 pages, 5 by 8. So in around there, but like I kind of gravitate more towards and I don't know why. Maybe I get too intimidated by the big, massive, like Lawrence Durrell's The Alexandra Quartet is, I think, 900 pages, but it is 4 books in it, and it's incredible. But Anthony, so I had Andrea Mara on the podcast before, and like, so Andrea's, yeah, obviously it's kind of domestic suspense thriller, and like she was saying, like with one of her books where she got the concept for it was they went around to collect her child, and there was no one at the house where they dropped them off. And she got this, like, obviously there was a worry, but they just didn't hear the door or something like that. Anyway, and she got this like mad idea for one of her novels. So she, like, kind of the way she was explaining it, like she'll get like these random, almost epiphany moments around very mundane events, and then she will kind of evolve a thriller around that, really domestic, kind of like what Harlan Coben would do. It's all this, kind of domestic noir, nearly thrillers. But I can't imagine like it would be as easy to do a big world building sci-fi as easy. So where are these ideas coming from? Like you say, this idea factory in your head, right? How is
Yeah.
that churning out the ideas? Is it just random? Is it thoughtful? Is it?
A lot of places, I can be as inspired by a TV documentary about the Second World War, for example, as I can be just, watching an old episode of Tom and Jerry on YouTube or something. It can come from anywhere. And I have a hard time pinning down exactly what led to what. It
Yeah,
just kind of all goes into my head and churns around and eventually sparks off a story or an idea. There is a distinction between ideas and stories. Ideas are easy, stories are hard.
yeah.
Stories are where the work is. Anyone can have ideas. That you ever see The Player? The Robert Altman movie with Tim Robbins. Uh,
No.
yeah, it's about this. Tim Robbins plays this absolute scumbag of a film producer in Hollywood, Yes, he's the guy who sits down and listens to people pitching, movie ideas to him and saying yes or no and all the rest of it. And it sort of revolves around his paranoia about he keeps getting these letters, threatening letters sent to him. He doesn't know who's sending them. And there's also his job's under threat because he might be replaced by a younger, even more ambitious and unpleasant film producer who's played by Peter Gallagher, you may know. But anyway, there's a scene in it in which Peter Gallagher's character, and his whole shtick is that we're paying writers too much. You paid somebody $1 million for a script. That's insane. We shouldn't be paying them. To demonstrate his point, he gets the newspaper out and reads and goes through every headline in it and comes up with a script idea based on every single headline. To demonstrate the uselessness of writers, basically. So, yeah, the point is any idiot can come up with ideas just by going through the newspaper if you want to. But the hard part is stories. Because that's where the effort lies, is in creating a story out of an idea.
Yeah, and what I often say to people, like, about, writing and stuff like that. Like, if I'm a painter, I can potentially probably maybe paint, like, you watch Portrait Artist of the Year and stuff like that, and you'll see, they're doing their portraits or landscape artists of the year. It might be a 15 up to 50 hour piece of work commission. And there's instant feedback. Like, there's instant feedback. You have a songwriter. Some of the best songs in the world were written maybe in 30 minutes. Like, obviously not all of them, but like, even just say a week to write a good song, maybe 2 weeks then to record it, get everything right. You're talking 3 weeks and instant feedback. Someone can listen in 3 minutes. I find it's just so cruel with writing that it takes, like, it's probably takes, because I work full time as well, it probably takes me 1.5 years to write a novel.
Yeah.
And then I'm reliant on someone giving up 8 hours of their time to read it. So it's like this. It's a really it's one of the crueler aspects of the arts, because the commitment is incredible compared to some of the others, like typical arts where it's there's instant feedback and it's quicker to produce. Like, what's your thoughts on that? Like, do you think or have you a better strategy? Like, do you give people maybe bits of the writing? Like, is anyone able to get a sneak peek of what you're writing to get feedback on as you're doing it, or is it a closed book right until the end?
It's a closed book till it goes up to my editor. I don't use beta readers. I know people do. If it works for you, do it. And then when it comes to the writing process, there's no one size fits all. Everyone. We all write at different rates. I mean, there's a great film called Genius, where Jude Law plays Tom Wolfe, the original Tom Wolfe, not the Bonfire of the Vanities Tom Wolfe, who died in the 50s, I think. But he was contemporary, and they had the same editor, him and F. Scott Fitzgerald, who, of course, wrote Great Gatsby.
Yeah.
And there's a point where, Jude Law, his editor, asks Jude Law, Tom Wolfe, how many words did you write today? And he said, 8,000. Because he'd scribble constantly on any scrap of paper he could find anywhere, and it'd all go into this giant pile of paper that he'd then give to his editor, who had to try and turn it into a novel.
Ooh.
And he said, F. Scott Fitzgerald probably wrote 200 words today, and you'll probably get rid of most of them tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because there were different writers, because everyone's different, I don't know how long it took F. Scott Fitzgerald to write Gatsby, but
15 drafts.
15
drafts. But I think like that, I think there's 2 novels that probably epitomise, but 3 novels where it's like almost perfect, and like one is Gatsby. I don't know why. I think I read Gatsby every year for I think 10 years just to see how, because at the start I was enamored by Gatsby. Like, I was just like, to that heights of success. I think it was 23 when I first read it, and every year then I read it, and every year I would have a different formation on Gatsby, and I stopped reading it because I eventually got to the stage where I just seen the kind of rabid narcissism that was in Gatsby's character. But it was almost, I was tracking my own personality through reading the book, which is almost strange. But I think Gatsby, and then I want to come to your top three, by the way. I think Gatsby, I think Lawrence Durrell, the Alexandra Quartet. I just think it's like, not for plot. Like, the plot is, Durrell was writing in the 50s and stuff like that, but the prose is just unlike anything I've ever read, really. It's just poetic. And then I think Cormac McCarthy, The Road, is just earth-shattering. But yeah, what's your top three books, or even if you can't narrow it down to top three, like maybe top three inspirations, or anywhere around that kind of.
Yeah, it's very hard for me to pin down. Also, I'm not going to be in anywhere close to you in terms of literary merit, but because my favourites tend to be in the popular genre class, I guess. I think in terms of fantasy, I mean, David Gemmell, I don't know if you've ever read him, but he was sadly no longer with us, but he was a British fantasy author who kind of perfected what you'd call heroic fantasy as opposed to epic fantasy. It's one of his books called Wolf in Shadow has had a massive impact on me. And it really sort of, I don't think I'd be a writer if I hadn't read any David Gemmell, to be honest. In terms of, I wouldn't call it prose stylist, him a prose stylist, but in terms of learning how to structure a plot and how to come up with characters that people care about. Very few writers of fantasy, in my view, come close to David Gemmell. But another one I always liked, in terms of, I think I learned how to really pare down my writing and really concentrate on producing the best sentence you can. And that was The Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris.
Well, I've never read that. I've seen the movie, all right, but like what? Just the kind of his efficiency in words.
Yeah, to use one word to sum it up is efficiency. You can tell reading it, every single word has been considered and reconsidered and reconsidered.
Oh, that's going to be on the
incredibly
list.
precise writing. That one, Silence of the Lambs and Red Dragon, which is the one that came before it, both the Dr. Lecter novels.
Yeah.
There's a third one which you don't need to bother with, but those two they're probably best read back to back, and they're probably the finest thrillers ever written, I think, in terms of precision of the language and the way it's all put together.
Character as well.
Kind of remarkable, yeah. But looking at my shelf now, I mean, there's a lot of books on there. Ian M. Banks, Use of Weapons, which is one of his culture novels, because he'd write science fiction and contemporary fiction. That was had a big impact on me in terms of talking about villains and how the villain views themselves. And Use of Weapons is a really good masterclass in that. But yeah, I probably could go on for several hours just going through my shelf. So it might be best to leave it at that.
And Anthony, what age then were you when you first, put pen to paper is probably the wrong aphorism now, but like when your first foray into attempting to write even short story, or like when you took it kind of a bit more serious, what age were you then? Like, I know you said you were working in the civil service at that stage, and I think I read online you were had a research background, so maybe you would have been used to forming conclusions or kind of a process to writing anyway and research. But what age?
Really, in my 20s, I started taking it more seriously, but perhaps not as seriously as I should have. I do kind of regret not buckling down to it more when I was in my 20s. I was in my 30s when I wrote Blood Song, which took 6.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah. I did have a day job at the time, but But I kind of kept adding to it, leaving it, and then coming back after a month or so. So It wasn't like a one long continuous process, but
Yeah.
I do think I learned how to write whilst writing that book. Because the principal lesson I learned writing it was that rewriting is writing.
Hmm.
Um, I think some writers will claim they just write one draft and that's it, and it's perfectly formed and off it
Hmm.
goes. I think they're probably lying. Yeah, you need to rewrite. You need to
Yeah.
make it better. Uh, my prose is, it's okay in the first draft, but it's not at a publishable standard in the first draft. It only gets there with the rewrite. Yeah, that was the principal lesson I learned. Yeah. So 6.5 years to write that book. When I got my contract, I had a year to write the next one. Uh,
And were you able, like, did you leave the civil service job then, or?
at that point, no, I still had to hold down the job and write the second book.
Oh,
So I was, yeah, that was when I was doing the 2,000 words a day thing. And I was writing, I was get up in the morning, I get out of bed about 6. I spend an hour or two writing, go to work, write on the train to work. I'd write at lunchtime at work. I'd write on the train home, and then I'd do another hour or so after I got home.
it's passion.
I couldn't do it now, but I was
That's the
young then.
30s.
So yeah, and it was the experience of doing that that convinced me that I need to quit this job. And
Yeah, it's
I had the money in the bank by then. So
and Anthony, give me the process, right? So, like, morning, right? Like, obviously, when you were writing the next one after Blood Song, it was kind of, uh, it was. I'm thinking of the word and I can't think of it, but pretty much you were shoehorning it in everywhere, the writing. But like now that you're fully fledged, or it's you're not double jobbing. Like, what's the process? Are you a morning writer, evening writer? Uh, do you listen to music? Like, what's the process, or is it just you in a quiet room? Like, what does it look like when you sit down to write?
I'm a big believer in establishing a routine and sticking to it. And I track my progress on a
Okay.
spreadsheet because I'm kind of anal that way. But I do find it helps actually with productivity, tracking your progress. It sort of makes you accountable to yourself. And if you build it in as part of your daily routine, it just because it's part of the habit. I think to be productive, you have to establish writing as a habit because humans are habit forming creatures. And if writing something every day becomes a habit, the easier you're going to find it and then the more of it you will do, at least in my experience. So yeah, I write in this room. I usually sit down about midday after I've dealt with any emails or admin stuff. Um, and yeah, I'll write down the time I start, and I'll write down the time I finish, and the number of words I've done. And yeah, I don't write all in one session. It's usually 2 or 3 sessions from 12 maybe till 5 p.m. somewhere like around about there. Well, I'll stop for the day. And
Yeah.
yeah, usually it's about 1,200, 1,000 to 1,200 words is what I can produce comfortably these days. And I do find embracing the comfort zone is another key to productivity. I don't think writing should be hard. It shouldn't be putting you in an early grave. Um, just for me, if I'm going to be able to sustain this career, yeah, perhaps keep going as long as Stephen King has. Uh,
Yeah.
I need to kind of embrace the comfort zone and make it something that's doable, as opposed to continually striving to do more than I actually can.
Yeah, because then it's just churning, and you lose probably some of that intrinsic motivation. It just
Yeah.
becomes so extrinsic, and like I think all the research they've done, like extrinsic motivation leads to poorer outcomes compared to intrinsic.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good. I never even thought like to actually track it, and it's probably because I'm like what you were on Blood Song and trying to shoehorn in writing at every, like I'm the same when I'm on the train to work, on the train home. So hopefully I'll follow in your footsteps with the same process. But uh, like, so kind of what's next on the cards, Anthony? So the feeding, I have started it. I'm really
Remarkable
excited.
coincidence. I've got a copy.
Oh, that's what it looks like, because I've seen it on ebook.
This is the
Wow.
US version.
Yeah.
The UK cover is different, but yeah.
Anthony, official date of when that's out?
That's in the US. It's out in 12th of August. I think in the UK it's 2nd of October.
Okay, and I suppose give the listeners maybe a bit of a kind of blurb or an elevator pitch, like what's it about, if if they're thinking of going to get it.
Yeah, it's. I mean, the Red River 7 was post-apocalyptic, but
Yeah,
it's kind of, that was kind of an oblique approach to it. This is much more, you know, in the vein of The Walking Dead, where the apocalypse has happened and the people are living in the aftermath. Uh, and it's about a young woman who lives in a kind of protected enclave where life is pretty hard and they don't have enough food or medicine. But the outside world is overrun by vampires, basically.
yeah,
There's been a vampire apocalypse. And in order to get medicine, they have to journey from one, enclosed settlement to another to trade for various goods. So this young woman, Layla, because her adopted dad is dying of a lung infection, she decides to join this band of crossers, as they're called, and it's their job to go out into the vamp-infested wasteland and bring back any medicine they can find. And as you can imagine, things don't go according to plan.
yeah. It wouldn't be a book otherwise. But yeah, that sounds fascinating. I've started it, and I'm really enjoying it. And I think, like, I know we've talked about this kind of already, but like, what is it about that post-apocalyptic, that survival? What do you think we're tapping into, like, when we gravitate towards that book? Like, it's a wildly popular genre.
Yeah.
Like, I know romance is like everything is kind of can be classified as popular, but I think, like, and maybe, sorry, I'm being biased because these are the sort of books I read. But like, even like you wrote this, why do you think people gravitate towards these stories? Like, what is it that draws us in? Is there excitement? Is it a dopamine rush?
I think people I don't know, are fascinated by the prospect of the world they live in being either ending or being completely transformed. An apocalypse will do that, Um, and it's kind of like secondary world fantasy, but it's not. You're in a transformed world, but all the cultural tropes are recognizable. You don't have to make up the entire world; you just have to destroy it. And so I think that sort of relatability to the world, a world that you can recognize even in its destroyed state, is kind of attractive to people. And also, I think it's the question it asks. At the heart of all post-apocalyptic fiction is, what would you do? Yeah,
Mm,
you find yourself in the world where everything's gone to hell. How do you think you'd react? How would you be the Rick Grimes or the Negan?
yeah.
Or I'd be the guy who, slowing everyone down. To be honest, I'd like to think I'd be the Rick Grimes, but I know it wouldn't be. And it's that sort of putting yourself in that situation element, I think, is another attractive aspect of post-apocalyptic fiction.
Yeah, like that's fascinating. Like the way, because it's almost an invite then to introspect on your own character, your own nature. So it's almost, it's almost you get to project yourself into that world. Like, even though you're following the character's journey, you kind of have to explore your own, and that is a very interesting way to look at it. And like, that's maybe what we're all kind of seeking then in it,
I mean,
which is
there's a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction out there. It's really popular in the self-published indie author space. And most of the books are in this formula of It's usually an ex-special forces guy who's been a zombie apocalypse, and he's the badass who goes around, saving people, killing all the zombies. There's a set formula for it, which is fine, if that's what you want. But I think it fulfills, a wish fulfillment element
Yeah.
present in post-apocalyptic fiction, because there's an awful lot of people, all the prepper movement and all that, with the stockpiling canned goods and guns. I think what they're not actually dreading the end of the world. A lot of these people, they're looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Because they don't like it the way it is, and to a certain extent that's understandable. But I don't really want to see the world end myself.
No, but I find that very true. You see this kind of like, I think there's more like people that would be excited, like for like, I just, from what I've seen on social media, when you're seeing like if it's Iran and US, if you're seeing Israel, Palestine, any of these things, there's people almost like, eating the popcorn, sitting back and enjoying, obviously. It's like, did you ever hear that story when the Titanic was going down and, the the band were like playing a song and on the violin and all that? There's almost people out there like sitting back enjoying the music as Titanic sinks. But I think maybe they're romanced by the idea of, we'll get back to, I'll have meaning in my life. I've no meaning. I work on a job I hate. It's like, the food I eat is shit. I've no relationship or something like that. And almost there's a romanticism of the world ending and I'm going to have meaning. I'm going to survive and I'm going to be a leader. But I think
it'll be the Rick Grimes.
They're going to be the Rick Grimes. So there is a hero fulfillment. But I think the actual reality would be like probably the epitome of hell.
Unbelievably horrible. You can't,
horror and
absolute
terror.
nightmare. Well, you would not want to be there.
Yeah, and it's probably the thing, like, because it's like movies, TV shows, even the books, they do give a romanticism to it because, like, there is a hero and there's adventure and, like, we're so deeply entrenched in mythology. It's like, underpins everything. Like, every human story is underpinned somewhere by mythology. You go back to Joseph Campbell and you can look at every myth and the kind of, the genesis of where religions come out of and all that. And I think, a story told about this post-apocalyptic world and like a hero rising to defeat evil. But I think the actual reality would just be so much death and suffering and horror.
You don't have to imagine it. It's happened.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, look at stories of civilians in World War II, where in any way that mattered, their world ended. The city they lived in got bombed to the ground. Soldiers that are not their soldiers start tramping through the rubble. Their world has effectively ended. And what comes across when you read first-hand accounts of people who went through all that is a sheer and utter helplessness. None of them get to be the Rick Grimes. None of them get to be the hero.
No.
They're just dependent on the mercy or otherwise of whichever band of armed men comes along. And they're not heroes.
Yeah.
So, it would be a world without heroes, I think.
Yeah.
Like, where you are helpless.
Helpless, yeah. And like, I think I had a historian on talking about World War II before. We were talking about because literally it was kind of almost like a world given over to psychopaths, so to speak. But then it wasn't, because most people weren't psychopaths. They just went along with, the trawl of authority almost. But I think one of the most frightening stories I heard of it was this camp guard called Otto Moll, where he was like throwing babies onto burning heaps of fire, ripping them from mother's hand. And the way it was described by the survivors is there was these like lakes of body fat burning, just lakes of body fat. And like, that is actually like, the horror. And like, but you know what the worst thing about it was, Anthony? So I put up a short clip of that conversation on my social media. And I think around 70% of the comments were, "Oh, the Holocaust never happened." Like, they're not. I was like, this is so absurd. No, it's like instead of actually getting the horror of the story, people are like, "Oh, it never happened," and I'm like, "Oh my god!" It actually frightened me. I did not think there was like that community out there, and then I don't know, it just confused me, man.
It's one of the more depressing aspects of modern life is conspiracy theories in general. Some of them relatively harmless. I'd like to think there was a Bigfoot. I'd like to think there's UFOs flying around spying on us.
Yeah,
But Holocaust denial was,
that's sick. It's pernicious.
what the hell is that?
Yeah. Oh, that is a strange one. But Anthony, look, thanks so much for your time. Tell readers, Anthony, where can they find you? Well, actually, just even if you shout it out, I will put a link in because I have your website up here, anthonyryan.net. But yeah, where can they find out? I know we have the dates for the new book, but even if they want to explore your other books, all on the website?
All on anthonyryan.net. Yeah. Also, social media wise, and primarily on Blue Sky these days. It's
Okay.
just anthonyryan.bsky.social.
Okay. Perfect. Well, look, I will put all your links in the description. I highly recommend Red River 7, but I really want to read this Blood Song because it's just so highly rated. The reviews are incredible on Amazon across the web. But yeah, Anthony, look, thanks a million for coming on. Thanks for giving your time. Really enjoyed chatting to you. And I think I learned a few tricks from you as well. I'm going to be more, I think, systematic with my writing, do a bit more tracking, get more routine based. So kudos for that advice. But look, have a lovely evening.
You too, Guy. Thanks for asking me.
Thanks a million.
Take care.